The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in Fort Davis, Texas, and Lillian Turner wished it had been lost in the mail forever. Her Uncle Henry was dead, struck down by a heart seizure while hauling supplies through the mountain pass, and according to the lawyer's cold black letters, he had left her exactly one thing: $600 in debt and a mule too stubborn to sell. It was April of 1882, and Lillian stood in the dusty street outside the telegraph office with her entire world crumbling around her shoulders like dried adobe in a windstorm. She had 23 years behind her and nothing ahead, except this inheritance of misery. Her parents had died of fever when she was 16, and Uncle Henry had been her only living relative, though she had not seen him in 7 years. He had gone west to make his fortune, sending occasional letters that grew shorter and less frequent until they stopped altogether. Now she understood why. The man had been drowning in debt, borrowing from merchants and banks to keep his freight business running, and it had killed him just as surely as the heart seizure. The lawyer's letter explained that, as his sole heir, she was responsible for settling his accounts. If she could not pay, the creditors would seize what little he owned and possibly pursue her for the remainder. She had arrived in Fort Davis 3 days ago with $47 to her name, having sold everything she owned back in San Antonio to make the journey. The difference between 47 and 600 might as well have been the distance to the moon. Lillian folded the telegram and tucked it into her sleeve, then walked slowly down the main street. Fort Davis sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, a military outpost town that had grown into a trading hub for ranchers and miners. The spring air was clear and cool, carrying the scent of juniper and dust. Adobe buildings lined the street alongside wooden structures with false fronts, and wagons rattled past carrying goods to the fort or supplies to the scattered ranches in the high country. She found the freight office where her uncle had kept his business, a small building with peeling paint and a sign that read Turner Freight in faded letters. Inside, a clerk with spectacles and ink-stained fingers looked up from his ledger. "Miss Turner," he said, recognizing her from her previous visit, "I was not expecting you today." "I received the telegram about the debt," Lillian said, keeping her voice steady. "I need to see the full accounting." The clerk's expression grew uncomfortable. He pulled out a thick folder and spread papers across the desk. "Your uncle owed $300 to the First Bank of Fort Davis, $200 to Caldwell's General Store for supplies purchased on credit, and $100 to the livery for feed and stable fees." There were also smaller debts, but those were the primary creditors. Lillian studied the papers, her heart sinking with each line. What assets are there? The freight wagon was sold 2 weeks before his death to pay immediate debts. There are some tools, harnesses, and personal effects worth perhaps $30 total. And there is the mule, but I must warn you that animal is worthless. Your uncle called him Clarence, and every buyer who has looked at him has walked away. He is 17 years old, stubborn as Satan himself, and has a tendency to bite. May I see him? The clerk led her out back to a small corral where a gray mule stood in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Clarence was indeed old, with a swayed back and scars on his flanks from years of hard work. When Lillian approached the fence, he swung his head toward her and showed his teeth in what might have been a greeting or a warning. "Hello, Clarence," she said softly. The mule's ears twitched forward. His dark eyes studied her with an intelligence that seemed almost human. After a moment, he walked closer and sniffed her outstretched hand. His breath was warm and grassy. "Well," the clerk said, surprised, "that is the friendliest I have ever seen him." Lillian stroked the mule's nose. "What happens if I cannot pay the debt?" "The creditors will take everything, including Clarence, though I doubt they would get much for him. They might sell him for meat." As for you, they could pursue legal action. In practical terms, you would likely be forced into indentured servitude until the debt is satisfied. The words hit her like a physical blow. Indentured servitude meant working without wages, her labor assigned to whoever purchased her debt. It could take years to work off $600, and she would have no freedom, no life of her own. The thought of it made her stomach turn. How long do I have? The creditors have given you 2 weeks to settle the accounts or make arrangements. After that, they will take action. Lillian thanked the clerk and left, her mind racing. 2 weeks. She had $47 and a mule no one wanted. She could try to find work, but no job in Fort Davis would pay enough to earn $600 in 2 weeks. She could try to borrow the money, but who would lend such a sum to a woman with no collateral and no prospects? She walked back to the boarding house where she had rented a small room, hardly seeing the street before her. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman with gray hair and weathered hands who charged reasonable rates and asked few questions. Lillian climbed the stairs to her room and sat on the narrow bed, staring at the wall. For the first time since receiving the telegram, she allowed herself to cry. The tears came hot and angry, mourning not just her uncle but the life she had hoped to build. She had come west thinking she might find opportunity, perhaps work as a teacher or seamstress in a growing town. Instead, she had found only debt and despair. A knock on the door interrupted her tears. She wiped her eyes quickly and opened it to find Mrs. Patterson standing in the hallway with a concerned expression. "I heard you come in," the older woman said gently. "Are you all right, dear?" Lillian managed a weak smile. "Just some difficult news about my uncle's affairs." Mrs. Patterson nodded sympathetically. "These things are never easy. Listen, there is a gentleman downstairs asking about freight services. He stopped by looking for your uncle's business. I told him about the situation, and he asked if you might speak with him. His name is Vincent Lawson." "I do not know anything about running a freight business," Lillian said. "Perhaps he can help in some other way. He seems like a decent sort and he has kind eyes. It cannot hurt to talk with him." Lillian hesitated, then nodded. She washed her face in the basin, pinned her dark hair back more securely, and went downstairs to the boarding house parlor. A man stood by the window, his back to her as he looked out at the street. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working outdoors. He wore denim trousers, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a leather vest. A wide-brimmed hat hung from a peg by the door, and when he turned at the sound of her footsteps, she saw a face that was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and eyes the color of slate. "Miss Turner," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Thank you for seeing me. I am Vincent Lawson. I own a ranch about 15 miles north of here." Lillian shook his offered hand, noting the calluses on his palm and the strength in his grip. "Mrs. Patterson said you were looking for freight services." "I was. I have supplies that need hauling from the rail depot, and I heard your uncle's business was reliable. I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Lillian said carefully. "I am afraid the business is not operating at present. My uncle passed recently, and there are complications with the estate." Vincent nodded slowly. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned there were difficulties. I do not mean to pry, but if there is anything I can do to help, I would be glad to offer it." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. His expression was sincere, without the false sympathy or predatory interest she had encountered from other men since arriving in town. He seemed genuinely concerned, though they were complete strangers. "That is kind of you," she said. "But unless you have $600 you are willing to part with, I am afraid my situation is beyond help." She meant it as a bitter joke, a way to deflect the conversation, but Vincent's expression grew thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. $600 is a considerable sum. Is that the debt your uncle left? Lillian found herself explaining the situation, the words spilling out before she could stop them. She told him about the telegram, the creditors, the worthless mule, and the threat of indentured servitude. As she spoke, Vincent listened without interrupting, his gray eyes focused on her face with an intensity that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I will pay half." Lillian blinked, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me." $300. I will pay half your debt and I will ask for nothing in return. That is absurd. You do not even know me. Why would you do such a thing? Vincent looked out the window again, his jaw tightening. When I first came to Texas, I was 17 years old and alone. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a borrowed horse. A rancher named Tom Bradford gave me work when no one else would, taught me the cattle business, and treated me like family. When he died, he left me a small parcel of land and enough money to buy my first herd. He gave me a chance when I had none. I built my ranch on that foundation, and I have always believed in paying that kindness forward. But $300, Lillian protested. That is not just kindness, that is a fortune. I've done well with the ranch, I can afford it. And I cannot stand by knowing someone is facing indentured servitude when I have the means to prevent it. He turned back to her, and his expression was firm. I am not offering this lightly. I know what I am doing. Let me help. Lillian felt tears threatening again, but these were different. I cannot accept such generosity without offering something in return. Let me work off the debt. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I can learn ranch work if you will teach me. Vincent shook his head. I have hired hands who handle the ranch work, and a woman who comes in twice a week to cook and clean. I do not need labor. If you want to repay the kindness someday when you are on your feet, you can help someone else who needs it. That is payment enough. I do not understand you, Lillian whispered. Why are you really doing this? He met her eyes steadily. Because it is the right thing to do, because I have been fortunate and fortune should be shared. And because when I look at you, I see someone who deserves a chance to build a life without being crushed by circumstances beyond her control. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with sincerity. Lillian realized she was trembling. If you pay $300, I still need another $300. Do you have anything toward that amount? $47. Vincent considered this. I know the banker, Charles Morrison. He is a fair man. With $300 paid and your $47 as a down payment, he might be willing to work out terms for the remaining $253. You could pay it off over time with interest. It would not be easy, but it would be possible. Hope flared in Lillian's chest, painful in its intensity. Do you really think he would agree? Let me talk to him. I will vouch for your character and I will co-sign the loan if necessary. We can go to the bank tomorrow morning. Why would you co-sign? That would make you responsible if I cannot pay. Then I suppose you had better pay, Vincent said, and there was the ghost of a smile on his lips. Do we have an agreement, Miss Turner? Lillian found herself nodding, too overwhelmed to fully process what was happening. Yes. Yes, we have an agreement, but I must insist on one thing. What is that? Once I have work and am earning money, I will pay you back the $300, every cent. I will not be in your debt forever. Vincent extended his hand. You have my word that I will accept repayment if you insist, though I meant what I said about asking for nothing. Is that acceptable? She shook his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin and the steadiness of his grip. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I do not know what else to say. Vincent, he corrected. And you do not need to say anything. Get some rest tonight and I will meet you here at 9 tomorrow morning. We will visit the bank together." After he left, Lillian sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. Mrs. Patterson appeared from the kitchen with a cup of tea. "I told you he had kind eyes," the older woman said, handing her the cup. "He is either a saint or a fool," Lillian murmured. "Perhaps he is simply a good man. Those do exist, though they are rare enough." That night Lillian lay awake for hours, her mind churning. She kept waiting for the catch, the hidden motive, the moment when Vincent Lawson would reveal what he truly wanted. Men did not simply give away $300 to strange women without expecting something. And yet, his manner had been straightforward, his words sincere. She thought about the way he had looked at her, with respect and compassion rather than calculation or lust. It was unsettling precisely because it seemed genuine. The next morning, she dressed in her best gown, a deep blue cotton with a modest neckline and long sleeves. It was worn but clean, and she had pressed it carefully the night before. She braided her dark hair and pinned it in a coil at the nape of her neck, then studied herself in the small mirror. She looked tired and worried, but presentable. Vincent arrived exactly at 9, dressed in a clean white shirt and black vest, his dark hair combed back and his jaw freshly shaved. He looked different without the travel dust and workday stubble, younger and somehow more vulnerable. She guessed he was perhaps 26 or 27 years old, only a few years older than herself. They walked together to the bank, a sturdy building made of limestone blocks with iron bars on the windows. Inside, a clerk directed them to the office of Charles Morrison, the president. Morrison was a portly man in his 50s with mutton chop whiskers and a shrewd but not unkind expression. "Vincent," he said warmly, shaking hands. "Good to see you. What brings you to town?" "Business, Charles, and a request for a favor." Vincent gestured to Lillian. "This is Miss Lillian Turner, Henry Turner's niece. She has inherited his debts, and I am here to help resolve the situation." Morrison's expression sobered. "Ah, yes. A sad business, that. Henry was a good man, but he overextended himself. Please sit down, both of you." They settled into chairs across from his desk, and Vincent laid out the proposal. He would pay $300 immediately toward the debt. Lillian would contribute her $47. For the remaining $253, he requested the bank work out a payment plan at reasonable interest that Miss Turner could satisfy over time. Morrison listened, steepling his fingers. "That is a generous offer, Vincent. But I must ask, Miss Turner, what are your prospects for repayment? Do you have employment?" "Not yet," Lillian admitted. "But I am willing to work at any honest labor. I can read and write, I can sew and cook, and I am a fast learner." "The problem," Morrison said carefully, "is that most work available to women in Fort Davis will pay perhaps $5 to $8 a month. At that rate, even with minimal interest, it would take you years to pay off the debt, and that assumes you have no other expenses." Lillian's heart sank. She had not considered the mathematics in such stark terms. Vincent leaned forward. "What if I co-sign the loan? Would that satisfy your concerns?" Morrison looked troubled. "Vincent, I appreciate your character, but co-signing makes you legally responsible for the debt if Miss Turner defaults." "Are you certain you want to take that risk?" "I am certain." The banker studied them both for a long moment. "May I speak plainly?" "Please do," Vincent said. "There is an element to this arrangement that concerns me, and I say this with all due respect to you both. Vincent, you are a bachelor rancher with a solid reputation and considerable assets. Miss Turner, you are a young woman alone in the world with no family and no resources. If you enter into a financial entanglement of this nature, there will be talk. People will assume there is more to the relationship than charity. That could damage both your reputations." Lillian felt her cheeks burn. I have no designs on Mr. Lawson, if that is what you are suggesting. And I have no improper intentions toward Miss Turner, Vincent added firmly. I am simply trying to help someone in need. Morrison raised his hands. I believe you both, but Fort Davis is a small town and people talk. I am not saying this to discourage you, only to make you aware of the potential consequences. He paused, then added, however, if you both understand the risks and still wish to proceed, I am willing to draw up the papers. Miss Turner, I will lend you the $253 at 6% annual interest, with monthly payments of $5. At that rate, it will take you approximately 5 years to repay the loan, assuming you miss no payments. Vincent will co-sign, making him responsible if you default. Is that acceptable? Lillian did the calculation in her head. $5 a month was manageable if she could find steady work, though it would leave her with almost nothing for herself. But 5 years of poverty was infinitely better than indentured servitude. It is acceptable, she said. Acceptable, Vincent agreed. Morrison drew up the paperwork, and they spent the next hour reviewing and signing documents. Vincent wrote a bank draft for $300 without hesitation, and Lillian counted out her $47 in coins and small bills. When it was done, Morrison shook their hands. I will notify the other creditors that the debt has been satisfied, he said. Miss Turner, you are now responsible only for the loan from this bank. I will expect your first payment of $5 at the end of May. They walked out into the bright morning sunshine, and Lillian felt as though she had been holding her breath for days and could finally exhale. The weight of the debt was still there, but it had changed from a crushing boulder to a manageable burden. Thank you, she said to Vincent, the words inadequate for what she felt. You are welcome. Now what will you do? Find work, I suppose. Do you know anyone who is hiring? Vincent was quiet for a moment. Actually, I may have an idea. There is a woman named Ruth Hamilton who runs a small school for the ranchers' children about 3 miles outside town. She has been looking for an assistant teacher. The pay is not generous, perhaps $10 a month, but it includes room and board at the schoolhouse. If you are interested, I could introduce you. That would be wonderful, Lillian said, relief flooding through her. When could we go? I have business at the land office this afternoon, but I could take you out there tomorrow if that suits you. It suits me perfectly. They parted ways at the boarding house, and Lillian spent the rest of the day in a daze of relief and gratitude. That evening, Mrs. Patterson prepared a special dinner to celebrate, and Lillian found herself smiling for the first time since receiving the telegram about her uncle. The next morning, Vincent arrived with a wagon and a gentle mare hitched alongside his own horse. I thought you might appreciate your own mount, he said. This is Rosie. She is patient with inexperienced riders. Lillian had ridden horses as a girl but never regularly, and she was grateful for his consideration. The ride out to the school took them through rolling high desert country dotted with juniper and oak, the mountains rising blue and distant on the horizon. Vincent proved to be easy company, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranches they passed. He spoke of the land with genuine affection, and she began to understand that this place had become his home in a deep and abiding way. The schoolhouse was a small adobe building with a tidy yard and a well. Smoke rose from the chimney, and when they knocked, the door was opened by a woman in her 40s with auburn hair streaked with gray and intelligent green eyes. Vincent, she said warmly, this is a surprise. Come in, please. Inside, the single room was divided into a teaching area with benches and slates, and a living area with a bed, stove, and shelves of books. It was simple but comfortable, filled with light from the south-facing windows. Vincent made the introductions, and Ruth Hamilton studied Lillian with frank appraisal. Mrs. Patterson sent word you might be coming. She speaks highly of you, and that counts for a great deal. Tell me about your education." Lillian outlined her schooling, which had continued through her 16th year and included literature, mathematics, history, and basic sciences. She also mentioned her teaching experience helping with younger students during her own school years. Ruth asked her to read a passage aloud from a book, then to solve several arithmetic problems on a slate. "Finally," she said, "the position is assistant teacher and caretaker. I have 12 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old. Classes run Monday through Friday, 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. You would help with lessons, supervise the younger children during recreation, and assist with maintaining the schoolhouse and preparing noon meals. In exchange, you would receive $10 at the end of each month, plus room and board. You would sleep in the loft above the main room. It is not luxurious, but it is private and warm." "It sounds perfect," Lillian said honestly. "Can you start on Monday?" "Yes, absolutely." Ruth smiled, and the expression transformed her serious face. "Then welcome to Hamilton School, Miss Turner. I look forward to working with you." They shared a simple lunch of bread and cheese, and Ruth showed Lillian the loft space where she would sleep. It was a low-ceilinged area reached by a ladder, with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the valley. It was spare but clean, and Lillian felt a rush of gratitude that she would have a safe place to live and honest work to occupy her days. On the ride back to Fort Davis, Vincent seemed pleased. "Ruth is a good teacher and a good woman. You will learn a great deal from her." "I already feel fortunate," Lillian said. "I still cannot quite believe how much my circumstances have changed in 2 days. If you had not come to the boarding house, I would be facing a very different future. I am glad I could help." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders. Lillian found herself studying Vincent from the corner of her eye, trying to understand this man who had appeared in her life like some kind of miracle. He sat his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent years in the saddle, his hands light on the reins and his posture relaxed. There was a quietness about him, a sense of being comfortable in his own skin that she envied. "May I ask you something personal?" she said finally. "Of course." "Why are you not married? A man of your means and character, I would think you would have been claimed long ago." Vincent's expression grew wistful. "I was engaged once, about 5 years ago. Her name was Sarah, and she was the daughter of a rancher whose land bordered mine. We had known each other since we were children, and it seemed natural that we would marry. But as the wedding approached, I realized we did not love each other, not truly. We loved the idea of combining the ranches, of doing what our families expected. I called off the engagement, and she was furious. She married someone else within 6 months, and last I heard, she was happy. I realized then that I did not want to marry for convenience or expectation. I wanted to marry for love, even if that meant remaining a bachelor." "That was brave of you," Lillian said softly, "or foolish, depending on who you ask. What about you? No suitors back in San Antonio?" "None that mattered. There was a clerk who worked at the bank where I kept my small savings. He asked to court me, but he was boring as dust and smelled of onions. I declined." She smiled at the memory. "My mother always said I was too particular." "Being particular is not a flaw," Vincent said. "It means you know your own worth." The comment warmed her, and she realized she was enjoying his company more than she had enjoyed anyone's in a long time. There was something genuine about Vincent Lawson, something solid and trustworthy that made her feel safe for the first time since her parents' deaths. They reached Fort Davis as the sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Vincent helped her dismount in front of the boarding house, and their hands touched briefly as he steadied her elbow. "I will come by on Sunday afternoon to take you out to the school with your things," he said, "unless you would prefer to ride out on your own." "I would appreciate your company," Lillian said, and meant it. That night, she lay in bed thinking about the past few days and the strange turns her life had taken. She had arrived in Fort Davis expecting disaster and had instead found unexpected kindness. More than that, she had found Vincent, and the thought of him made her pulse quicken in a way that was both thrilling and frightening. She barely knew him, and yet she felt drawn to him in a way she could not fully explain. She reminded herself sternly that he had helped her out of charity, nothing more. He had asked for nothing, expected nothing. It would be foolish and presumptuous to read anything into his kindness beyond basic human decency. And yet, she could not forget the way he had looked at her in the banker's office, or the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to her, or the warmth of his hand on her elbow. "Stop being ridiculous," she told herself. "Focus on the work ahead. You have a job to start and a debt to repay. Romance is the last thing you need right now." But as she drifted toward sleep, it was Vincent's face she saw behind her closed eyelids, and the thought of seeing him again on Sunday made her smile. The days until Sunday passed quickly. Lillian spent them preparing for her new position, mending her clothes and organizing the few possessions she would take to the schoolhouse. She also visited the freight office to settle the final details of her uncle's estate. The clerk gave her the $30 from the sale of his tools and effects, along with a small box of personal items. A pocket watch, a handful of letters, and a photograph of her uncle as a young man with her mother, his sister, both of them smiling and carefree. Lillian kept the photograph and the letters, selling the pocket watch to add to her small savings. She also went to the corral to visit Clarence. The old mule seemed to recognize her, walking over to accept the apple she had brought. She stroked his neck and whispered her plans. "I am going to work at a school," she told him. "I cannot take you with me right now, but I will not let them sell you for meat. Once I have saved enough money, I will buy you back properly and find you a good home. You have my word." Clarence nuzzled her shoulder, and she felt tears prick her eyes. Her uncle might have been foolish with money, but he had clearly cared for this animal, and she would honor that. On Sunday afternoon, Vincent arrived at the boarding house with his wagon. Lillian had packed her belongings into a single worn carpet bag and a wooden crate, and he loaded them with ease. Mrs. Patterson came out to say goodbye, pressing a basket of food into Lillian's hands. "For your journey, and to help you settle in," the older woman said. "You write to me if you need anything, you hear, and you are always welcome back here if things do not work out." "Thank you for everything," Lillian said, embracing her. "You have been so kind." The ride to the school was pleasant, the spring weather mild and the landscape beautiful in the afternoon light. Vincent told her more about the ranching families whose children attended the school, painting a picture of a tight-knit community that looked after its own. She learned that he supplied beef to the fort and to several towns in the region, that he employed 6 ranch hands year-round, and that he had built his house himself over the course of 2 summers. "It is not fancy," he said, "but it is solid and comfortable. I have 3 bedrooms, a parlor, a kitchen, and a good barn. I built it larger than I needed because I hoped someday to have a family to fill it. So far it has just been me and the hands, but I keep hoping." The wistfulness in his voice touched her. "It sounds like a fine home. Perhaps you will see it sometime. The ranch is only about 12 miles from the school. I often stop by to check on Ruth when I am passing through, and I would be glad to do the same for you if you would not find it intrusive." "I would welcome the company," Lillian said, and realized it was true. The thought of seeing Vincent regularly made the prospect of her new life even brighter. They reached the school just as the sun was beginning to lower toward the mountains. Ruth came out to greet them, and Vincent helped carry Lillian's things inside. He climbed the ladder to the loft and set her crate and bag on the floor, then descended with the easy agility of someone accustomed to physical work. "You are all set," he said. "Ruth, take good care of her." "I intend to," Ruth said with a smile. "Thank you for bringing her out, Vincent." He turned to Lillian, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. His gray eyes were warm and steady, and she felt something shift in her chest, a sensation like the turning of a key in a lock. "If you need anything, send word," he said. "I mean that." "I will. Thank you, Vincent, for everything." He nodded, touched the brim of his hat, and left. Lillian watched through the window as he climbed into the wagon and drove away, something in her chest aching as he disappeared from view. "That is quite a man," Ruth said quietly behind her. "You are fortunate to have his friendship." "I know," Lillian murmured. That night, settled into her loft with the sounds of the desert evening filtering through the window, Lillian allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been avoiding for days. She was falling in love with Vincent Lawson. It was impractical and possibly foolish, but it was also undeniable. The man had walked into her life at her darkest moment and offered her hope without asking for anything in return. He had treated her with respect and kindness, had seen her as a person worthy of help rather than an object to be used. How could she not fall in love with someone like that? The question was what to do about it. He had given no indication that he felt anything beyond friendly concern. He had helped her because it was the right thing to do, not because he was courting her. To presume otherwise would be embarrassing for them both. So she would focus on her work, prove herself as a teacher, pay off her debt, and earn her independence. And if Vincent continued to visit, she would enjoy his company and guard her heart as best she could. It was the sensible course of action. But as she drifted off to sleep, she could not help hoping that someday, somehow, he might come to feel for her what she was beginning to feel for him. The first weeks at the school were demanding but rewarding. Ruth proved to be an excellent mentor, patient with Lillian's inexperience and generous with advice. The students were a lively mix of ranchers' children, some eager to learn and others more interested in the outdoors than in books. Lillian found herself particularly drawn to a quiet girl named Emma, 8 years old, who had a gift for storytelling, and a mischievous boy named Tom, who could calculate figures in his head faster than most adults. The work was tiring but fulfilling. She rose early to help prepare breakfast, taught lessons throughout the day, supervised recreation time, and spent evenings helping grade slates and prepare the next day's materials. By the time she climbed to her loft each night, she was exhausted but content. Ruth was good company, with a sharp wit and a wealth of stories about the families in the area. She had been widowed young when her husband was killed in an accident at a mine, and she had turned to teaching as a way to support herself. She loved her work with a fierce dedication that Lillian admired and tried to emulate. 3 weeks after Lillian started at the school, Vincent came by. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Lillian was helping Ruth plant a small vegetable garden behind the schoolhouse when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She looked up to see Vincent riding toward them on a handsome bay gelding, and her heart performed a ridiculous little leap. He dismounted and greeted them both, then said to Lillian, "I was passing by on my way back from the fort and thought I would check how you are settling in." "Ruth, is she behaving herself?" "She is an excellent teacher and a hard worker," Ruth said warmly. "I am very pleased with her." "I am glad to hear it. Miss Turner, might I have a word in private?" Lillian's pulse quickened. "Of course." They walked a short distance from the schoolhouse, stopping in the shade of a gnarled oak tree. Vincent removed his hat and turned it in his hands, a gesture that suggested nervousness. "I wanted to make sure you had everything you need," he said. "The loft is comfortable, the work is manageable, everything is fine," Lillian assured him. "Truly, I am very happy here." "Good. That is good." He hesitated, then said, "I also wanted to ask if you might be willing to accept an invitation. Every month, several of the ranching families gather for a social evening. Dancing, food, conversation. It is informal but pleasant. The next one is at my ranch in 2 weeks. I wondered if you would like to attend as my guest." Lillian's breath caught. "As your guest? Ruth is always invited, of course, so you would not be alone. But I thought it might be nice for you to meet more people in the community, and I would be honored to escort you." She studied his face, trying to read his intentions. Was this a friendly gesture or something more? His expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "I would enjoy that," she said finally. "Thank you for the invitation." Relief flashed across his face so quickly she almost missed it. "Excellent. I will come by to collect you and Ruth at 6 o'clock on the 23rd. Wear something comfortable for dancing if you have such a thing." After he left, Ruth gave Lillian a knowing look. "That man is courting you, whether he admits it to himself or not." "He is being friendly," Lillian protested. "He invited both of us. He invited me out of courtesy so you would not feel awkward, but his eyes were on you the entire time. Mark my words, Lillian Turner, that man is falling in love with you." Lillian wanted to argue, but she could not suppress the hope that bloomed in her chest. Perhaps Ruth was right. Perhaps Vincent's feelings were growing beyond simple friendship. The thought made her dizzy with possibility. The 2 weeks until the social passed slowly. Lillian worked hard at the school during the day and spent her evenings altering one of her better dresses to make it more suitable for dancing. It was a green cotton with a modest neckline and 3/4 sleeves, and she added new ribbons to the bodice to freshen it. She also washed and pressed her hair ribbons and polished her only good pair of shoes until they shone. On the evening of the social, she dressed with care, pinning her hair in an elegant coil with a few soft curls framing her face. Ruth lent her a delicate silver necklace, and when Lillian studied herself in the small mirror, she was pleased with what she saw. She looked pretty and respectable, like a woman attending a social event rather than a desperate debtor. Vincent arrived promptly at 6 with the wagon, looking handsome in a dark suit coat and pressed trousers. His eyes widened when he saw Lillian, and he seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "You look beautiful," he said finally. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The ride to his ranch took about half an hour, and Lillian was charmed by the property when they arrived. The house was exactly as he had described. A solid 2-story structure of adobe and wood, with a wide porch and large windows. The barn was well maintained, and the corrals were neat and sturdy. Everything spoke of care and pride in ownership. Already, wagons and horses were gathered in the yard, and music drifted from the open barn doors. Vincent had cleared the barn floor and hung lanterns from the rafters, transforming it into a surprisingly elegant dance hall. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and a small group of musicians played fiddles and a guitar in the corner. Lillian was introduced to so many people that their names blurred together. Ranchers and their wives, ranch hands in their Sunday best, a few merchants from town. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and she began to understand the strong sense of community Vincent had described. When the dancing began, Vincent claimed her hand for the first dance. It was a simple waltz, and he led with easy confidence. Lillian had not danced in years, but her feet remembered the steps, and she found herself relaxing into the rhythm. They moved together well, their bodies finding an intuitive harmony that felt both natural and thrilling. "You are a good dancer," Vincent said, smiling down at her. "So are you." "Where did a rancher learn to waltz?" "Tom Bradford's wife, the woman I told you about, insisted on teaching me. She said a man should know how to dance properly, even if he spent most of his time with cattle." They danced several more times throughout the evening, and Lillian noticed the speculative looks from the other guests. Ruth had been right. People were assuming there was something between them. The realization made her both nervous and hopeful. During a break in the music, Vincent led her outside for some fresh air. The night was clear and cool, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They walked a short distance from the barn, the music fading to a pleasant background hum. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Vincent asked. "Very much. This is wonderful, Vincent. Thank you for inviting me." "I am glad you came." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Lillian, may I speak plainly?" Her heart began to race. "Of course. I have been thinking about you constantly since the day we met. I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know you have every reason to be suspicious of my motives, but I need you to understand something." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. "I did not help you because I expected anything in return. I helped you because it was right, and because the moment I saw you standing in that parlor with your world falling apart around you, something in my heart recognized something in yours. I know that sounds foolish and impractical, but it is true." Lillian's breath had stopped somewhere in her throat. "Vincent, I am not asking for anything," he continued quickly. "I am not trying to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. I just needed you to know that my feelings for you go beyond friendship and beyond charity. If you do not feel the same, I will accept that and continue to be your friend. But if there is any chance that you might come to care for me, I want you to know that I am here and I am waiting, and I will wait as long as it takes." For a moment, Lillian could only stare at him, her mind reeling. Then she found her voice. "Vincent, I have been trying not to fall in love with you since the moment you offered to pay my debt. I have been telling myself it was impractical and presumptuous and foolish. But the truth is, I am already in love with you. I think I have been from the very beginning." His expression transformed, hope and joy lighting his face like sunrise. "You mean that?" "I mean it with all my heart." Vincent reached for her hands, holding them gently in his. "Then may I court you properly? May I take you to dinner and write you letters and come visit you at the school? May I do this the right way?" "Yes," Lillian said, laughing through tears she had not realized were falling. "Yes to all of it." He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, the gesture both reverent and intimate. "You have made me the happiest man in Texas." They stood together in the starlight, hands joined and hearts full, while the music drifted across the yard and the night wrapped around them like a blessing. Lillian felt as though her entire life had been leading to this moment, as though all the pain and loss and struggle had been preparing her to recognize true goodness when it appeared. Inside the barn, the music shifted to a slower melody, and Vincent smiled. "May I have this dance?" "Always," Lillian said, and let him lead her back inside. The courtship that followed was everything Lillian had dreamed of and nothing she had expected. Vincent proved to be romantic in practical ways. He brought her books from town that he thought she would enjoy. He helped Ruth repair the schoolhouse roof during a weekend, and he sent her letters filled with observations about his ranch and questions about her teaching. He also insisted on absolute propriety, never visiting without Ruth present and always treating Lillian with the utmost respect. Lillian found herself falling deeper in love with each passing week. She loved his steadiness and his quiet strength, his dry sense of humor and his genuine kindness to everyone he encountered. She loved the way he listened when she talked about her students, offering thoughtful advice without trying to take over. She loved the way he looked at her, as though she was the most precious thing in his world. They spent Sundays together whenever possible, sometimes taking picnics into the mountains, and sometimes simply sitting on the porch of the schoolhouse talking for hours. Vincent told her about his childhood in Missouri, how he had left home at 16 after his father died, and his mother remarried a man who had no use for stepchildren. He had worked his way west through a series of ranch jobs, learning the cattle business and saving every penny. The land Tom Bradford had left him had been the foundation, but Vincent had built his success through hard work and careful planning. Lillian told him about her parents, about the joy of her childhood before the fever took them, and the loneliness of the years that followed. She told him about her dreams of becoming a teacher, and how she had thought those dreams were lost when her uncle's debt crushed her prospects. Vincent listened to all of it with attention and compassion, and he never once made her feel foolish or weak for her tears. Summer arrived, bringing longer days and warmer weather. The school term ended in late June, and Ruth asked if Lillian would like to stay on through the summer to help with maintenance and preparation for the fall term. Lillian agreed readily, glad for the continued work and income. Vincent visited more frequently during the summer, often bringing one or two of his ranch hands to help with projects around the schoolhouse. They repainted the exterior, built new benches for the students, and constructed a small chicken coop so the school would have fresh eggs. Lillian enjoyed watching Vincent work, the easy competence with which he handled tools and the natural leadership he showed with his men. In August, on a particularly warm evening, Vincent asked Lillian to take a walk with him. They strolled down the road that led away from the school, the setting sun painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. After a while, Vincent stopped and turned to face her. "Lillian, I have been thinking about our future." Her heart skipped. "Have you?" "I have. I know we have only been courting for a few months, but I am 30 years old, and I know my own heart. I love you. I love your intelligence and your kindness, your strength and your courage. I love the way you care for your students and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love everything about you, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He took a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond. "Lillian Turner, will you marry me? Will you come live at the ranch and be my wife and my partner and the mother of the children I hope we will have? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" Lillian felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of pure joy. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes, Vincent, I will marry you. I love you so much." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time, a gentle but passionate kiss that spoke of love and promise and forever. Lillian melted into him, her hands clutching his shoulders and her heart soaring. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "You have made me the happiest man alive. And you have given me a future I never dreamed possible," Lillian whispered. They were married in October, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Davis. Ruth served as Lillian's witness, and Vincent's foreman, a gruff but kind man named Jake, stood up for him. The congregation was filled with friends and neighbors, and Mrs. Patterson wept happy tears throughout the service. Lillian wore a dress of ivory silk that Vincent had insisted on buying for her, despite her protests about the expense. When she walked down the aisle and saw him waiting at the altar, his face full of love and wonder, she knew that every hardship she had endured had been worth it to reach this moment. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the ranch with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. When it was finally over and the guests had departed, Vincent carried Lillian over the threshold of their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he said, setting her gently on her feet. Lillian looked around the house that was now hers, seeing the care Vincent had taken to make it ready for her. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, wildflowers filled vases on the tables, and a new quilt covered the bed in the master bedroom. Everything spoke of his love and his desire to make her happy. That night, they became husband and wife in every sense, discovering each other with tenderness and passion. Lillian had been nervous, but Vincent was patient and gentle, guiding her through the intimacy with love and care. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Lillian felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you more than words can say," Vincent replied, his arms tightening around her. "You are my heart, Lillian. You always will be." Life at the ranch was different from anything Lillian had known, but she adapted quickly. She learned to manage the household, working with the cook Vincent employed to plan meals for the ranch hands. She learned to ride better, exploring the ranch land and growing to love the vast open spaces and the beauty of the mountains. She also continued to help Ruth at the school 2 days a week, unwilling to completely leave behind the teaching work she had come to love. Vincent proved to be everything she had hoped for in a husband. He was affectionate and attentive, always making time for her despite the demands of running the ranch. He consulted her on decisions about the property and respected her opinions. He brought her small gifts from town: books, ribbons, a music box that played a waltz. And every night he held her close and told her she was loved. Their first winter together was cozy and intimate. When snow blanketed the high country, they spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking. Vincent taught Lillian to play chess, and she taught him to play the piano that had belonged to Tom Bradford's wife and now sat in their parlor. They made love often, learning each other's bodies and desires with growing confidence and passion. In early spring, Lillian realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she finally told Vincent, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, and spent the rest of the evening making plans for the baby's room and choosing names. The pregnancy was not easy. Lillian suffered from morning sickness well into her 4th month, and she grew enormous as summer approached. But Vincent was endlessly patient, bringing her cool water when she was hot, rubbing her swollen feet and talking to her belly at night, telling their child stories about the ranch and the mountains. In October, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Lillian went into labor. Ruth came to help along with a midwife from town, and Vincent paced the hallway outside the bedroom like a caged animal. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, but finally, just before dawn, their son was born. They named him Samuel Thomas Lawson, after Vincent's father and Tom Bradford. He was a healthy, beautiful baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. Vincent held him with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son for the first time. "Thank you," he whispered to Lillian. "Thank you for this gift." "Thank you for giving me a life worth living," Lillian replied, exhausted but happy. Samuel proved to be a good-natured baby, and Lillian discovered she loved motherhood. Vincent was a devoted father, often carrying the baby in a sling as he worked around the ranch and spending hours simply watching Samuel sleep. Lillian would find him standing over the cradle at night, a look of wonder on his face, and her heart would overflow with love for this man who had saved her and married her and given her a family. 2 years later, their daughter was born. They named her Rosalina, and she had Vincent's smile and Lillian's quick intelligence. Samuel adored his baby sister, often bringing her his toys and patting her head with chubby hands. As the children grew, the ranch prospered. Vincent expanded his herd and purchased additional land, building the property into one of the most successful operations in the region. Lillian managed the household with skill and continued her teaching work, now holding informal classes for the ranch hands who wanted to improve their reading and writing. She also wrote letters to the newspapers advocating for better schools in rural areas, and her articles were sometimes published, bringing her a small measure of recognition. One afternoon in the summer of 1889, 7 years after that fateful day when Lillian had received the telegram about her uncle's death, she sat on the porch of their home watching Vincent play with the children in the yard. Samuel, now 6, was teaching his 4-year-old sister to ride a patient old pony. Vincent stood beside them, ready to catch Rose if she tumbled, his face alight with love and pride. Ruth came up the porch steps, carrying a basket of vegetables from her garden. She had become a fixture in their lives, visiting often and treating the children like her own grandchildren. "You look thoughtful," Ruth said, settling into a rocking chair. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now from what I expected," Lillian said. 7 years ago, I was standing in Fort Davis with $600 in debt and no hope for the future. I thought my life was over. And instead, it was just beginning. Yes, because of Vincent, because he saw someone in trouble and decided to help, asking nothing in return. He is a good man. But you are the one who had the courage to accept that help and build something from it. You paid off your debt, proved yourself as a teacher, and created this beautiful life. You should be proud of yourself, Lillian. Lillian smiled. I paid back the $300 Vincent gave me, you know. It took 5 years, but I did it. He protested every step of the way, but I insisted. What did he do with the money? Put it in a trust for the children's education. He said if I insisted on repaying him, he would use it to invest in our family's future. Ruth laughed. That sounds like Vincent. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children play. Then Ruth said, "Whatever happened to that old mule? Clarence, was it?" "Oh, Clarence is living his retirement in the South pasture. Vincent bought him back from the freight company the month after we married. Said he wanted to keep everything connected to our beginning. The old devil is probably 24 years old now, but he is still going strong. Samuel visits him every day with apples. A happy ending for everyone then." "Yes," Lillian said softly. "A happy ending." That evening, after the children were asleep and the ranch had settled into quiet, Lillian and Vincent sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge. Vincent had his arm around her shoulders and she leaned against him, feeling safe and cherished and home. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Paying that debt for a stranger?" "Never," Vincent said firmly. "Not for one single moment. That debt brought you into my life, and you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I used to wonder why you did it, why you would give so much to someone you did not know. I told you why, because it was right, because I had been helped when I needed it most. And because something in me recognized you as someone worth saving. You did not just save me, Vincent. You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. You gave me love, family, purpose, a home. You gave me everything." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes reflecting starlight. "You gave me everything too. Before you, this was just a ranch. Now it is a home filled with love and laughter. You made me whole, Lillian. You always will." She lifted her face for his kiss, and they sat together in the warm Texas night, wrapped in each other and in the love they had built from hope and kindness and faith. The journey from that terrible day in Fort Davis to this moment had been long and sometimes difficult, but every step had been worth it. Lillian thought about the telegram that had changed her life, about the $600 in debt and the stubborn mule, about walking into an uncertain future with nothing but desperation driving her forward. She thought about Vincent appearing in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice, offering help without conditions and love without reservations. Life was strange and unpredictable, she reflected. Tragedy could turn to blessing in the space of a heartbeat. Despair could transform into hope with a single act of kindness. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the worst moment of your life could lead directly to the best. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "About how grateful I am," Lillian said. "For all of it, the good and the bad, because it brought me here to you. I am grateful too, every single day." They sat in peaceful silence, the sounds of the night wrapping around them like a lullaby. In the distance, a coyote called and the wind whispered through the grass. Inside the house, their children slept safely, dreaming innocent dreams. And here on the porch, two people who had found each other against all odds held tight to the love they had built and the life they shared. As the years continued to pass, the Lawson family grew and flourished. Samuel proved to have his father's natural way with animals and a deep love for the land. He learned the ranching business from Vincent, spending long days riding with him through the high country, checking on cattle and mending fences. Rose inherited her mother's quick mind and love of learning, devouring every book she could find and showing remarkable talent for drawing and painting. In 1892, Lillian gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Henry, after her uncle. Vincent had suggested the name, saying that without Henry Turner's debt, they never would have met, and that deserved to be honored. Henry was a cheerful, robust baby who grew into an adventurous child, always exploring and getting into mischief that made his parents laugh even as they corrected him. Lillian's work advocating for rural education bore fruit when the county established 2 new schools in the ranching areas, and she was asked to help select the teachers and curriculum. She threw herself into the work, finding fulfillment in making a difference for children across the region. Vincent supported her fully, caring for their own children when she traveled to meetings and proudly telling anyone who would listen about his wife's accomplishments. The ranch continued to prosper. Vincent purchased additional land and began experimenting with improved cattle breeds, earning respect throughout Texas for his progressive approach to ranching. He also became known for his fair treatment of employees, paying good wages and providing housing for families. Several of his longtime ranch hands built homes on the property and raised their own children alongside the Lawson kids. Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house owner who had first introduced Lillian to Vincent, passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1894. Lillian was at her bedside in the final hours, holding her hand and thanking her for the kindness she had shown to a desperate stranger. Mrs. Patterson smiled and whispered, "I knew that man was something special the moment I saw him. I am so glad I was right." Ruth continued teaching for many years, and the Lawsons made sure she wanted for nothing in her old age. She became a beloved fixture in their home, spending holidays with them and doting on the children. When she finally retired from teaching at 63, she moved into a small cottage on the Lawson property, and Samuel built her a beautiful garden where she grew flowers and vegetables until the day she died at 71, surrounded by the family she had helped create. Clarence the Mule lived to the remarkable age of 28, spending his final years in peaceful retirement in the South pasture. When he finally passed away one spring morning, the entire family held a small service, and Vincent buried him on a hillside overlooking the valley. Samuel carved a marker that read, "Clarence, faithful friend," and they planted wildflowers on his grave that bloomed every spring thereafter. As Samuel grew into a young man, he fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a spirited girl named Catherine with auburn hair and green eyes. They married when he was 23 and she was 21, and Vincent deeded Samuel a portion of the ranch to start his own operation. Lillian wept happy tears at the wedding, seeing her son so clearly in love and remembering her own wedding day 17 years earlier. Rose showed no interest in ranching but had her heart set on college. It was an unusual ambition for a woman in the 1890s, but Vincent and Lillian encouraged her dreams. They sent her to a women's college in San Antonio, where she studied literature and art. She returned home each summer with new ideas and endless enthusiasm, filling the house with her energy and creativity. Eventually, she became a teacher herself, opening a small art school in Fort Davis that attracted students from across the region. Henry, the youngest, proved to have a gift for working with horses. He began training horses for the ranch at 14, and by 18 had developed a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in West Texas. He traveled to ranches across the state, working with difficult horses and teaching others his methods. He never married, claiming horses were less complicated than women, but he remained close to his family and visited often. In 1902, 20 years after that fateful meeting in Fort Davis, Lillian and Vincent celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary. They hosted a large party at the ranch, inviting friends and family from across the region. As Lillian looked around at the gathering, she was struck by the richness of the life they had built. Their 3 children, all grown or nearly so, were healthy and happy, pursuing their own dreams. The ranch was thriving. They had friends who loved them and a community that respected them. That night, after the guests had departed, Lillian and Vincent climbed to the hilltop behind their house where they often went to watch the sunset. It had become their special place over the years, a spot where they could be alone together and talk about everything and nothing. 20 years, Lillian said, looking out over the land that stretched to the mountains. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. I remember every detail of the day we met, Vincent said. The way you looked standing in that parlor, trying so hard to be brave. The way your hand felt in mine when we shook on the agreement. I knew even then that you were extraordinary. You saved my life, Vincent. We saved each other, he corrected gently. I was living half a life before you, Lillian. I had success and property, but I did not have love. I did not have purpose beyond accumulating wealth. You gave me a reason to build something that mattered. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. She leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. Do you remember what you said to the banker? That you wanted to pay that kindness forward. I do. We have done that, have not we? Through our children, through the schools, through the way we treat the people who work for us. We have created something good from that terrible beginning. We have, Vincent agreed. And I think we will continue to do so for whatever time we have left. They sat together as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold. Lillian thought about all the twists and turns that had brought them to this moment, all the choices and chances and small miracles that had woven their lives together. Thank you, she said softly, for everything, for seeing me when I needed to be seen, for helping me when I needed help, for loving me even when I could not quite believe I deserved it. Vincent kissed the top of her head. You deserved it all and more. You still do, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know it. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, they walked hand in hand back to their house, where lamplight glowed warm in the windows and their children's voices could be heard in laughter and conversation. It was the sound of home, of love, of a life well lived. Lillian had started with $600 in debt and one stubborn mule. Vincent had paid half and asked for nothing, but what they had given each other in return was immeasurable. Love, family, partnership, and a lifetime of happiness that grew richer with each passing year. The years continued to bring both joy and sorrow, as life always does. In 1905, Samuel and Catherine welcomed their first child, making Vincent and Lillian grandparents. The baby girl was named Lillian Rose, after both her grandmothers, and she wrapped the entire family around her tiny fingers from the moment she drew breath. Vincent, who had been such a devoted father, proved to be an even more doting grandfather, spending hours rocking little Lily and singing her the old songs he remembered from his childhood. Lillian watched her husband with their granddaughter and fell in love with him all over again. There was something profoundly moving about seeing this strong man made gentle by love, about watching him pass his wisdom and kindness to another generation. She had worried sometimes in the early years about whether she was enough for him, whether their marriage of circumstance could sustain deep and lasting love. But every year had proven those fears groundless. Their love had only deepened with time, growing roots that went so far down nothing could shake them. In 1907, tragedy struck when a winter storm caught Henry out on a distant ranch where he was working with horses. He took shelter in a lined shack but developed pneumonia from the cold and damp. By the time the storm cleared and he could be brought home, he was desperately ill. Lillian and Vincent nursed him around the clock for 2 weeks, but despite all their efforts and the doctor's care, Henry died 3 days after his 25th birthday. The loss shattered them. Henry had been their baby, their wild, joyful child who found beauty in everything and made people laugh wherever he went. His death left a hole in their lives that nothing could fill. Vincent aged years in the weeks following the funeral, and Lillian wept so much she thought she might never stop. But they had each other, and they had their surviving children, and slowly they learned to live with the grief. Samuel and Rose drew close to them during that terrible time, offering comfort and understanding. Little Lily, now 2 years old, brought moments of light with her innocent laughter and affection. They learned that grief did not diminish love, but rather proved its depth, that the pain of loss was the price of having loved so fully. On what would have been Henry's 26th birthday, they planted an oak tree on the hillside where they had buried him, next to Clarence's grave. The symbolism was not lost on them. The stubborn mule who had been part of bringing them together now rested beside the son they had created from that love. Life and death, beginning and ending, all woven together in the tapestry of their years. He would have laughed at being buried next to a mule, Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. He would have found it perfect, Lillian agreed, tears streaming down her face. He always did love the absurd. They held each other as the sun set, drawing strength from their connection. The grief would never fully leave them, but it would become bearable. They would learn to carry it alongside their joy, understanding that both were part of the full human experience. Time, as it always does, continued its forward march. Samuel and Catherine had 3 more children, and Rose eventually married a professor she met while teaching art in San Antonio. His name was William Rhodes, and he was a gentle man who shared Rose's love of learning and creativity. They settled in Fort Davis, so Rose could continue running her art school, and they had 2 children of their own. Vincent and Lillian found new purpose in their grandchildren, passing along stories and values and love. They taught the children to ride and read, to respect the land and treat people fairly, to value education and kindness above wealth or status. The Lawson Ranch became a gathering place for the extended family, especially during holidays when the house rang with the voices of children and the warmth of belonging. In 1915, Vincent began to slow down. He was 63 years old and had worked hard his entire life. His body began to show the wear of years in the saddle and long days under the Texas sun. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Lillian never wavered. He turned over the daily operation of the ranch to Samuel, but still rode out each morning to check on things, unable to fully let go of the work that had defined so much of his life. Lillian, now 56, had silver threading through her dark hair and lines around her eyes, but she remained energetic and engaged. She continued her education advocacy work and spent countless hours with her grandchildren, reading to them and teaching them and listening to their dreams. She and Vincent had grown even closer as they aged, their connection deepening into something that transcended words. They could communicate with a look, finish each other's sentences, and knew each other's thoughts almost before they were spoken. One evening in the summer of 1917, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sunset paint the mountains. Vincent reached over and took Lillian's hand, his grip still strong despite his years. "I have been thinking," he said, "about how to measure a life well lived." "Have you reached any conclusions?" Lillian asked, squeezing his hand. "I think it is measured in love, in the people whose lives you touch, the kindness you show, the family you raise, the good you do. By that measure, I think we have lived very well." "We have," Lillian agreed, "though I could not have done it without you, nor I without you. You were the missing piece, Lillian. Everything good in my life flowed from meeting you that day 35 years ago. I thank God every day for that $600 in debt." Lillian laughed softly. "Only you would thank God for debt. It was the debt that brought you to me. It was the debt that let me help you and earn your trust and eventually your love. I would pay that debt 1,000 times over if it meant having you in my life." She brought his hand to her lips and kissed his weathered knuckles. "You are the best man I have ever known, Vincent Lawson. You saved me when I needed saving, loved me when I needed love, and stood beside me through everything life brought us. I could not have asked for a better partner or a happier life." "I love you," Vincent said simply. "I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you beyond the end." "And I love you," Lillian whispered, "forever and always." They sat together as darkness fell, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life that mattered. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Inside the house, photographs documented their journey. Their wedding day, the children at various ages, grandchildren being held by proud grandparents, family gatherings full of smiles and connection. It was a legacy of love, built on a foundation of kindness, and sustained through choice and commitment. It had started with $600 in debt and one stubborn mule, with a cowboy who paid half and asked for nothing. But what had grown from those humble beginnings was immeasurable. A love story for the ages, a family that spanned generations, a life rich with meaning and connection. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to shine, Vincent and Lillian rose and walked into their home together, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that they faced it side by side. Their story, which had begun in desperation and uncertainty, had transformed into something beautiful and lasting, proof that kindness could change lives and love could overcome any obstacle. Vincent lived to see 71 years, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1923 with Lillian beside him, holding his hand and whispering words of love. His death was gentle, as though he simply decided his work was done, and it was time to rest. Lillian mourned him deeply but took comfort in their 41 years together, in the family they had built, and in the knowledge that their love had been real and true and enduring. She lived another 12 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her fiercely. She continued her education work until she was 80, only stopping when her health finally began to fail. In her final days, surrounded by family in the house Vincent had built, she spoke often of him, remembering their life together with joy and gratitude. "He saved me," she told Rose one afternoon. "But more than that, he loved me. He chose me every single day, and that made all the difference." Lillian died on a spring morning in 1935 with flowers blooming outside her window and her children beside her bed. Her last words were Vincent's name, spoken with love and longing. They buried her next to him on the hillside overlooking the valley, where wildflowers grew thick, and the wind carried the scent of juniper and sage. The Lawson family continued to thrive, generation after generation, carrying forward the values Vincent and Lillian had instilled. The ranch remained in the family for over a century, a testament to what could be built with hard work, integrity, and love. And in Fort Davis, their story became legend. The tale of a woman who inherited debt and despair, and a cowboy who paid half and asked for nothing, and the love that grew between them that changed everything. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the years. Because at its heart, it was a story about the power of kindness, the possibility of redemption, and the enduring strength of love freely given and gratefully received. It was a story that reminded people that even in the darkest moments, hope could appear in unexpected forms, and that sometimes the worst day of your life could lead directly to the best. $600 in debt and one stubborn mule. A cowboy who paid half and asked for nothing. And a love that lasted a lifetime and echoed through generations. That was their legacy, and it endured.